Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my March wrap up. So the month of March was an interesting one because from my perspective, I feel like I've been quite slumpy throughout March. I think you're going to see in my stats that everything is just a little bit all over the place, and it's not like March isn't a good representation of me as a reader. But despite me feeling slumpy, I did manage to read 13 books and also 100 pages of another one before I DNF'd it. So I have read a considerable amount. I will say that we do have some comics in here, some manga, and also a collection of poetry, which is unusual from me. And I did read 8 of the books out of the 13 during the Bookopoly weekend, where I read 8 books in 2 days. So yeah, March was a very weird month, and I think that you are going to see that reflected in my stats. So getting into those stats, in the month of March I read 4,027 pages, which broke down to an average of 129 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 2 stars, 1 3 star, 7 4 stars, and 3 5 stars, which breaks down to an average rating of 3.72 per book. For the demographics, we had 3 young adult, 1 new adult, and 9 adult. For the formats, we had 6 standardly formatted books, 2 audiobooks, 2 comics, 2 manga, and 1 ebook. For the genres, this is wild. I read 2 fantasy, 2 contemporary, 2 romance, 1 dystopian, 1 fantasy romance, 1 paranormal, 1 sci-fi, 1 thriller, 1 historical fiction, and 1 collection of poetry. And finally, for the places where we sourced these books from, 11 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2021. 1 of them was from Scribd and 1 of them was from Kindle Unlimited. So starting off with my DNF, there really is no tea with this one. It's just from the first chapter I knew it really just wasn't my thing, and that was The Midnight Queen by Sylvia Hunter. I got to page 120 in this, but this is a historical fiction that has a fantastical element, and I was unsure going into this like how dominant the fantasy element would be. I thought it sounded intriguing. I've heard that there's a slow burn romance in here, so I thought I would give it a try. However, it was just the writing style for me that made it so that I couldn't continue. Once again, it's nothing bad. It's not a bad writing style. It just reads like a historical fiction, like a period drama. And as somebody who doesn't love historical fiction to start off with, especially not period dramas, I just really could not get on board with the writing style in here. It was very slow moving because it's historical fiction. The romance, while I guess it was building up, it wasn't really there. And romance in historical fiction, like the slow build and the propriety, is one of the reasons why I don't like historical romance type books. So yeah, this one just really wasn't for me. The fantastical element was kind of in the background but never really present, and it was more of, I guess, like a magical theory or like a scholarly type of situation as well, as opposed to it being overly present in the narrative. So not for me. I don't think it's a bad book. I didn't finish it, so I can't say anything about the plot or the pacing or anything like that. But if this does sound interesting to you, if you like historical fiction or period dramas, then I would recommend giving it a try. However, it just was not for me, so I DNF'd this one. So the first 2 books I finished in March were for my Unhaul project. The first one of these was Suicide Club by Rachel Heng. This one is a literary dystopian, a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but it follows a young woman who lives in this society where you have the potential to live for a very long time, and this is through medical technology. It's come in waves. We are currently going into, I think it's the 3rd wave is about to be launched. So at the moment, people, like, your minimum life expectancy, providing that you follow guidelines, is around 150 years old, and the next wave that's being rolled out will give people the potential to live forever. However, to be able to do this, you have to live healthily, so you can't be exposed to like unfiltered air. Like, your home has to be airtight and air conditioned to keep you at the optimum temperature. People don't eat meat. The exercise that people do is all low impact, so gentle exercise like swimming and yoga, but nothing too vigorously, of course. And the main character is really into this lifestyle. She wants to live forever. That is until she accidentally walks into the path of oncoming traffic because she sees her estranged father across the road, and this puts her under observation, where a team who are concerned about her will to live essentially come in to monitor her and make sure that she is following all of these guidelines and living life to its fullest potential to live forever, not to actually like enjoy yourself. So I gave this one 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. It kind of felt like a prequel to Scythe. The writing in here was really accessible. The story was reasonably compelling. I will say that it was a little bit like it dragged a tiny bit throughout the middle of this, but overall the message in here is like, yes, like be healthy and look after yourself, but kind of don't forget to enjoy life at the same time. Like you can't live life to its fullest and enjoy your life if you're living under such regimented guidelines and you can't really do anything enjoyable. I will say that this was a little bit of a triggering read for me. I don't have health anxiety exactly, but I am very squeamish about things, especially things that relate to like medical stuff that also tie into like death and immortality and things like that. It's a real weird thing, but I get squeamish and my teeth, my nails start to tingle, and this triggered that quite a lot because it's talking in depth about like the medical technology, and it's kind of like the advertisements that we see today but like ramped up to 1000%. So the things that say like don't smoke otherwise you will get cancer and die, but like don't do anything because you will die kind of thing. So if you have anything similar to me, if you have health anxiety, I would maybe stay away from this or at least be cautious going into it. With my squeamish thing, I'm aware of it. It never triggers to the extent that I can't continue to read something, but it did trigger those symptoms in me. So please do be wary of that going in if you experience anything like that, because it was just not an enjoyable time. The next one was an adult thriller, and that was All Is Not Forgotten by Wendy Walker. I did listen to the audio of this because I don't listen to a whole ton of audiobooks, but things like thrillers or contemporaries are the only ones that I can listen to. And this one follows a young girl. She's a teenager. I think she's around 14, and she goes to a party where a boy that she likes upsets her, so she wanders into the woods where she is very brutally raped. Now on the back of this it doesn't say anything about sexual assault, but really big trigger warnings for sexual assault in here, because this book is told with a very clinical style narrative. So you get a very detailed, in-depth description of how this girl was brutally raped from the perspective of somebody who's like in a clinical field. I won't tell you who it is because you only find out a little way into the book, and I do like to go into thrillers quite blind. Straight from the prologue, very detailed descriptions of rape. And the main thing about this is that after this girl was raped, her parents agreed to put her into this treatment that would erase her memories from the night. So she was already in shock from the event, and her parents agreed to this treatment that would make her forget everything. However, her body still remembers, and her body still has responses to what happened that night. And the characters in here are kind of split. Like half of the characters, like her mother, just want her to forget and move on with her life, and then the other half of the characters, like her father, are wanting to get to the bottom of who actually committed this crime so that they can face justice. I gave this one 4 stars as well. I really enjoyed it. I've read another thriller from Wendy Walker before as well, which was Emma in the Night, which I also really enjoyed. So would recommend Wendy Walker if you are looking for thrillers. However, do be warned that they are quite graphic. They do deal with quite hard-hitting topics. I don't know if I was I maybe slightly underwhelmed by the end of this. I do think it was a solid thriller. I was intrigued all the way throughout, and it's very character focused, as you are in the mind of the person who is telling the story and following the lives and the struggles of the character of the girl, and also the people who surround her, like in her immediate family, and also like a little bit of small town politics. So if that sounds up your alley, I would recommend that you give this a try, but do take the trigger warnings seriously, because I don't mind reading about stuff like this, but considering it starts in like the prologue, I would have appreciated it if the synopsis said that it dealt with sexual assault, just so I was prepared. I then read Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. This has been recommended to me numerous times because of how much I love Nevernight, and this is a adult grimdark fantasy that follows a young girl, I think she's around 8 years old at the start of this, called Nona Gray. And Nona is about to be hanged for attacking an influential figure when the abbess of the convent of Sweet Mercy comes and takes her away to the convent where the nuns all train to be assassins. So the way that this school is structured is that you have different classes, and when you have performed to like the acceptable quality in each of your different skills, you can move up a class. So we start off in here with Nona in red class. She's around between 8 and 10 years old, and then she moves up into grey class. Now there are 2 other classes which I'm assuming are going to be explored in the sequels to this, but one of my favorite things about this was just the school environment. I'm a sucker for a training academy or like a magic school or anything like that, and I do feel like this definitely delivered on those vibes. But my absolute favorite thing about this was the prologue sections. So we have a prologue at the beginning, and then before the grey class section we also have another prologue, and the prologues are telling the story from the future. So something is happening in the future, and then the bulk of the book is telling the story up until this point, and I just found the prologues to be so captivating. I was really invested in what was going on with them. All of the sisters have like multiple names, so when you enter into the school you have the name that you were born with, and then you get to choose your holy name, and some of them also have like specialty names. So the leader of the shade class is called the Poisoner, but her holy name is also Sister Apple, and she's also the mistress of shade because she teaches a shade class. So right in the first prologue you have the holy names of the nuns, but then as the characters are entering into this school, they're entering with their birth names, so you don't know who the prologue is actually talking about until you get a little bit further into the book. And I really liked how those prologues built upon each other and left me hooked, because the position that the characters are in that prologue is very different to where they are throughout the bulk of this book, even down to the relationships that they have with each other and things like that. So I'm really interested to see how that is going to progress throughout the rest of this series, which I am actually really desperate to continue with. In terms of it being recommended to me because I love Nevernight, I went into this expecting that to be because there is a young girl training to be an assassin. However, this is very similar to Nevernight in more ways than that. I wouldn't say that the writing style is necessarily similar, because Nevernight uses a lot more metaphor and the writing is not necessarily flowery, but it is more descriptive in Nevernight. But the tone is very, very similar. Like straight away going into this, I got the exact same vibes that I got when reading Nevernight. So I can confirm if you do like Nevernight, you will enjoy this as well. It is a very slow story, and I don't necessarily think that the pace is overly slow because I never felt bored while I was reading this, and I don't think that it's necessarily dense, but it took me a long time to read each page, and the text isn't big, but it took me a long time to get through this book. Maybe I was just ingesting the story slowly, because while it's not dense, there are a lot of like politics to get to grips with, both the politics of the area where the convent is, there's like the world and the world building and how that's situated, because it is like kind of vaguely far in the future, but in a future where the world has reverted to like medieval state, I would say. And then there's the politics within the nunnery. There's also all of the magic system and the classes and all of that to learn. So yeah, it took me a while to read this, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's overly slow paced. I really like slow paced books though, so it might be. And I wouldn't say it's overly dense, but it took me a while. Next up we have my Bookopoly stack, and I did read quite a few comics and manga for that, so I'm going to kick off with those first. The first one I read was Rat Queens Volume 4 by Rock Upchurch. This is the 4th installment in an adult comic series that follows a group of boozy battle maidens for hire that, after starting one bar fight too many, are thrown into jail, and they are offered their freedom providing that they complete some quests for the realm. So where I'm up to at Volume 4, the story has moved on quite a bit, but it is this high fantasy story with 4 badass women. It is a very queer story, it is very diverse, and I really like the characters in here and the story. The art style has changed in this one, and I was a little bit sensitive to the art style changes. However, I found the best way to combat that is to leave it a little while in between volumes, and then I don't really notice the art style change at all. We also had the introduction introduction of a trans character in this volume. They were introduced in a little short story at the end of volume 3, but they have now become a part of the main cast in this volume, which I really love to see. But I just really love how fun and sassy and sarcastic the characters are in here. I love the antics that they get up to because they're not your typical heroes, you know. They do like to drink an exceptional amount, they have a whole ton of sex, but they value each other above all else. And you have your ups and your downs. You have your fun fantasy plotline where they're taking on things like enormous trolls, and then you have the emotional moments where they're dealing with personal issues. So yeah, I just really love this comic book series. Would recommend if you're looking to get into comics. It is a very fun one to get into, and if you are a fan of epic fantasy in general or high fantasy in general, I think you'll enjoy this one. The other comic I read was the first volume of the Buffy reboot. So I'm a massive fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I have been in my entire life. I started watching it when I was way too young. I was probably around 3 or 4 years old, and it was on in the background in my childhood. I watched it obsessively from like my early teen years, maybe even earlier, all the way through. I've just completed a complete rewatch of this as well. But the reboot is the story of Buffy the Vampire Slayer with the characters that we know and love in a very modernized format. So we have like a lot more technology in here. The language is a little bit more modern. The fashion is a lot more modern. It is more diverse than the original TV show was. And my favorite thing about this is how they kept the voices of the original characters. I find the artwork in here to be absolutely stunning with the way that they've portrayed the original actors, but they've kept the voices the same as well, so I can read this in the voices of the actors that portrayed the original characters. Something fun that they've done with this that I also really enjoy is that they have introduced characters that only turn up later in the TV show into this first volume, so they are going to be present from the beginning. A key one of these, I guess, would be, for example, Robin Wood, who is the principal in season 7, is present in this volume as a teenager. We have Spike and Drew coming in here in season 1 instead of season 2. Angel is present for 1 frame. I think he's going to come into it a little bit later. And yeah, it was just really fun as a fan to see what they've done with this and see it reimagined in a modern setting. I do believe that there is a Buffy reboot in the works. I don't know if I'll watch that because of how precious Buffy is to me, but this reboot definitely did do it for me. Really enjoyed it. So if you're a fan of Buffy, you don't know whether to read this because you don't know how it's going to deal with like your favorite thing ever, I enjoyed it. It is completely subjective. Some people might really hate what they've done with it, but I really liked it, and I cannot wait to continue with this. I also read volume 3 and volume 4 of Dreaming Sun by Ichigo Takano. This is a shoujo manga series that follows a young girl who's having difficulties at home because her father has remarried and they have a new baby. She's feeling very pushed out, so she decides that she's going to run away. She packs up her things, she leaves, and she stumbles across this drunk guy in the park who says that she can go and live with him provided she fulfills 3 requirements. The first one is that she tell him why she left home. The second is she find his missing house key, and the third is that she has a dream and falls in love. So this is just like a very funny, cute, young adult contemporary story about this girl who's moved in with these 3 guys. 2 of them are in her class. The guy that she finds in the park is actually her landlord, and she is kind of experiencing normal teenage girl stuff, I would say. She has a crush on one of them. She's trying to pursue that, trying to gain his attention, doesn't really know how to. I'm not a fan of like young adult coming of age stories, young adult contemporary stories that are as basic as this in plot usually, but something about that genre in manga really does it for me, and these volumes just make me really happy. I don't know why. I just really love this series. It makes me happy, it makes me laugh out loud, and they're just really sweet and really fun. I will say that the original manga is probably around 10 years old. I think that these were translated in around 2015-ish maybe, but because of that there are quite a few not necessarily problematic elements, but things that make you roll your eyes a little bit or you're a little bit confused. Things like fat phobia, which I do believe is incredibly common in Japanese culture, does translate into these. So if you are going into these, please be aware that they are translated from a different culture that doesn't necessarily have the same ideals as Western culture, and I think you'll find them really fun and enjoyable. I gave volume 3 4 stars and volume 4 3 stars. This one I really enjoyed. It made me laugh a lot. This one meandered quite a bit and I wasn't entirely sure why, but I still really like the characters and the themes and stuff in this. For the other 4 books that I read for Bookathon, the first one was This Is How We Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El Motar. This is very short. I think it's 198 pages, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. This is an adult sci-fi with strong themes of romance. So we are following these 2 agents called Red and Blue, and I can't remember which way around it is now. From what I can gather, because it is a very confusing read, one of the factions, I think it's Blue, primarily alters time from the past, and Red comes from somewhere a little bit more futuristic, but they essentially manipulate the threads of time to get the most desirable possible outcomes for their factions. And these 2 agents are competing against each other for their factions to get the outcome that their faction wants. And while they are doing this, they are passing notes between each other that they leave throughout time for the other one to find. And these notes start off as very like competitive, very sassy, like there's a lot of back and forth and banter between them, and throughout the course of time, both as this novel progresses and time itself, they start to fall in love. I will say I did not 100% understand what was going on with the time travel stuff in this. Time travel is something that is hard to wrap your head around to start off with, but with how short this is and how it kind of just dives right into it and you're in completely different time periods with every chapter pretty much, it is difficult to get a grasp on exactly what is at play here. I think the more times you reread this, the more you will kind of understand about that element, but the main focus of this is the romance between them and how they fall in love. I really enjoyed the writing style in here. It is very flowery, it's a very beautiful read, and this is a romance for the soul, similarly to what I said about Addie LaRue. Like, it's not like a, I don't know, like a thirsty, compelling, like passionate romance. It is a slow, soulful romance, and those are the romances that like make my heart soar. I loved it so much. It's a female-female relationship as well, so I was very pleasantly surprised by this, because you guys know I don't typically love short things, but this just absolutely blew me away. I loved it, and I would be interested in reading something a little bit more like this in the future. Honestly, I'm just shocked. I'm shocked that I loved it so much, but 5 stars, and I wouldn't be surprised if this turns up in my favorites of the year video. I also read a very popular booktube favorite, which is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did listen to the audiobook of this because it has a full cast audio, and I would say that I definitely recommend reading this that way, because the audiobook adds so much atmosphere and so much depth to this story, and I think I would have given it a lower rating had I not listened to the audiobook. So this is an adult historical fiction slash contemporary kind of story. It is a fake biography essentially about this band called Daisy Jones and the Six. So it starts off in the early 60s. Yeah, we start off mid 60s, 1966, and we are following Daisy Jones, who is this young woman from a privileged home who is pretty much neglected by her parents, and she starts to go out, hang around clubs, get into the music scene and things like that. And we are also following a band called the Six, which was started by these 2 brothers who are from an underprivileged household and created music together that eventually started to gain traction. So this band is completely fictional, but it is as though it was a biography. It's about this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, coming together for the first time to talk about what actually happened, their experiences of being in the band, and why they broke up, because one day they just decided that they weren't going to perform or make any more music and just disbanded and went their separate ways. So this is the only real account from the perspective of what happened during that time. There's a lot of bias in this book. There's also a lot of inconsistencies, which is interesting because it is supposed to be a representative of the memories of these members, and everyone remembers things differently, which was really cool. I really liked the audiobook because it's full cast. You have a narrator for every member. It adds a lot of personality to the book, and it was something that I was listening to while I was diamond painting, so I just wanted something that was compelling to occupy my mind, because diamond paint is pretty mindless and repetitive, and this definitely fit the bill for me. It also includes one of my favorite things in books, stories in general, like movies as well, that I can't tell you because it it's like a reveal that happens at the end, but it is one of my favorite themes and I really enjoyed that element of it. And I gave this book 4 stars overall because I think it was very well crafted, especially in terms of like the audiobook. These books are weird that Taylor Jenkins Reid's writes, like the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and this one, because they're just fake biographies. It's just such a weird thing to write a fake biography, you know what I mean? I'm not being very eloquent right now, but yeah, it was enjoyable. I did enjoy it, but I would say that my enjoyment rating for this would be 3 stars, because while I enjoyed the narrative, while it was a really great listen, while I was compelled all the way through and I really like the atmosphere, I have no interest in the music scene in the 60s and 70s, which is what this mainly surrounds. It deals a lot with like substance abuse and addiction and the rock and roll lifestyle that I just don't care about. I did really like this. I think it is a decent book, especially if you're going to listen to it, but if you aren't interested in the music scene in that time period, I don't think you're going to love it as much as everyone does. There's a little bit of a middle of the road review from me on this, because I know a lot of people adore this book and it's their favorite book. I understand where you're coming from. I just don't care about the music industry. I then read Confess by Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover is my go-to to get me out of a reading slump or like a quick read, so I thought it was perfect for a 48-hour readathon. This one is an adult romance, but it starts off with the main character as a teenager and she is visiting her boyfriend in hospital for the final time because he is dying from cancer. So that is just like the prologue of this, but trigger warnings for grief, loss of a loved one, cancer, also domestic abuse in here as well. But we start off with that little prologue and then we flash forward to where the main character Auburn is looking for a job, and she goes past this art studio with a vacancy in the window that is owned by Owen Gentry. Now the purpose of this art gallery is that people post anonymous confessions through the letterbox, and Owen uses this as inspiration to create his artwork. So Owen has a string of unsuccessful relationships under his belt. He is your typical artist. He pours everything into his work. He doesn't really have time for anything else, and the main character Auburn isn't particularly looking for a romantic relationship due to her current like situation. The interesting thing about this one is that both of the characters are hiding things from each other, and when you're going into this as a reader, you don't know anything. You don't know what's happened to Auburn in the time between her boyfriend dying and now, and you have no idea who Owen is, and this is revealed to you piece by piece throughout the course of the narrative, which I really enjoyed because it kept me compelled, kept me turning pages, and kept me on the edge of my seat. Overall, I gave this one 4 stars. I love Colleen Hoover for how angsty, dramatic, and over the top everything is in her romances. They are wildly unrealistic. All of her books are at least mildly problematic, but it definitely provides an entertaining read with a decent, compelling romance. Like the sexual tension and stuff is there, regardless of whether the elements are slightly problematic or not. And this was no different from her. This was exactly what I expected from Colleen Hoover. A lot of her books have similarities, but I always find like the drama to be different in each one. So even being somebody who has read a lot of her books at this point, I'm still like surprised and entertained and on the edge of my seat when I'm reading her book. So yeah, if you have read from Colleen Hoover before, it is the typical thing that you would expect. I would definitely recommend it if you're trying to get out of a reading slump. Just be aware that they are slightly problematic, so if that's not something that you're into, maybe steer clear of Colleen Hoover. But if you want a wild, angsty, dramatic ride, Colleen Hoover is the author for you, and this book is the same as her usual. The final book that I read for Bookoplathon was just a little collection of poetry called Good Morning, Good Night, Little Pep Talks for Me and You by Lin-Manuel Miranda and illustrated by Johnny Sun. This is not a book that you're supposed to read in one sitting. It is like a little poem for the morning and the night time. You're supposed to read like one in the morning, one at night to make you feel good, you know, give you a little boost to your day. However, I have nowhere near enough structure in my life to be able to do that, so I got the audiobook for this on Audible, and I'd listened to some of it previously. Like I'd been listening to chunks while I was putting my makeup on, like daily or weekly or whatever, and I read I think probably the last 2/3 of it during the end of Bookoplathon. I just wanted something really easy, and even though you're not supposed to read it in one sitting, I would just recommend just popping it on whenever you need a little boost, because the audiobook is narrated by Lin-Manuel Miranda as well, and there's just something real good about having Lin-Manuel Miranda tell me nice things about myself that I I really enjoyed. So I gave this one 5 stars. It is a hard one to rate because there's not a lot of text here. The illustrations are really nice as well. But yeah, if you need a little bit of a pick-me-up, I would consider getting the audiobook of this because it's just nice, you know. It's a good time. I can't really review it. There's not a lot here, but it made me feel happy, and that's worth something. So the last 2 books I read in the month were both 2 stars. They were both romance. The first one was Den of Vipers by K.A. Knight. I did a full spoilery vlog on my experience reading this, and it was not a good one. So this one has, I believe it's been popular on TikTok, but I can't attest to that. I do know that it made the rounds on Twitter because people were sharing the synopsis, like, what is this book? Because we're following a young woman called Roxy, and her father has gotten into a lot of debt with the gang that runs the city called the Vipers. So the Vipers come to collect, and her dad has nothing to give them, so he gives them his daughter, even though they're estranged, and she is sold to the Vipers. And it is a very erotic reverse harem romance with this gang of 4 Vipers and Roxy. Now, the whole thing in the synopsis is that Roxy can hold her own. She's not like a meek and mild woman that's gonna cower before these men. And the Vipers are all pretty wild, I would say. There's a whole lot of stuff in here. There's like knife play, bloodletting, your typical like dom-sub kind of relationship. There's like hate sex in here. There's also one who's more gentle, but more gentle in terms of this just means like generally rough, not like tipping into BDSM kind of rough. So I'm down for anything, and I love my dark angsty stories, especially when they tie in with romance. I love to see how wild and crazy it's gonna get. I mean, from the synopsis straight off, we know this is wildly problematic, but I was down for it, you know. I was looking to be entertained and have a thrilling ride with this book. Sadly, it just really did not deliver for me. The pacing and structure of this book was not very well done, in my opinion. The plot kind of meanders throughout, which is what I expect from romance, because the focus is normally on the relationships between the characters, and you have tiny threads of plot that kind of come to a conclusion. But the conclusion in this book happened way too early, and then there was a further 100 pages which just really didn't need to be there, and read as a collection of like really wild sex scenes where the author was just trying to cram in all of the wild scenarios that she hadn't managed to fit in with the rest of the book, and it was just Roxy like cycling through these 4 Vipers. I will say that the conclusion of the plot I did kind of enjoy. There were parts in there where I was actually really into the story when we were in that little section, but from maybe the 40% mark of this, and this is a big book, it's 650 pages, I was just really bored. I was really bored, and the one thing I did not expect from this book is to be bored. Like, I expected it to be bad, I expected it to maybe be cringy, I expected to not be into it, but I really didn't expect to be bored, and that was my overwhelming feeling leaving this. Like, I just could not wait for it to end. And then that whole like 100 pages of sex scenes, and then just this wild thing that happened that I just didn't find necessary, like as an addition to the plot, I guess, to carry that 100 pages through. I was very bored. So I would not recommend this one. I mean, it's gaining some notoriety for being wild, so if you still want to give it a go and find out what's up there, then honestly don't blame you, because curiosity was one of the main reasons why I wanted to read this one. But for me, it didn't deliver. I didn't feel any sexual tension between the characters. I wasn't really into the majority of the smut in there either. It wasn't doing it for me. I will say though, because a lot of you guys are curious, my favorite Viper of the 4 is Ryder. I do really like Ryder. I think if this book was better done, I would have really liked Ryder, but after the first few instances between the main character and Ryder, like with everyone else, I was just really bored. I don't even know how to give trigger warnings for this book. It's gory, it's very explicit, it's problematic, there's just a whole ton of stuff in there, so read it if you wish, but it really is very wild. And then the final book I read in March was Fighting Destiny by Amelia Hutchins. This is the first book in the Fae Chronicles, which is a fantasy romance series, paranormal romance series that follows a young woman called Cynthia, who is a witch. She's part of a witches guild, and and the Dark Prince of the Fae, who is also called Ryder, which was a source of pain for me throughout this after having read Den of Vipers. But the Dark Prince of the Fae, Ryder, has employed the guild and Cynthia specifically to impersonate his betrothed, who is the heir to the Light Fae, because they believe that there are going to be some assassination attempts on her and Cynthia can actually hold her own. The problem is Cynthia despises the Fae because when she was a very young child, she saw them murder her parents. So as I'm sure you can gather, the core romance in here is between the main character and the Dark Prince of the Fae. I'm torn on my rating for this, or my review I guess, because I gave it 2 stars and I do truly believe it is a 2-star book. But enjoyment wise, I think I would have given it 3 stars. The plot was okay. I was kind of just glad that it had a bit of a consistent plot that carried this through. There's also like a string of murders throughout here where immortals are being killed and they're trying to figure out who did it. But I will say that the plot did get a little bit lost in here as well, because the main purpose or the setup is that Cynthia was going to impersonate this heir to the Light Fae, and that never really came to fruition. Like, there were things about the heir of the Light Fae in here, but the fact that Cynthia's main purpose was to impersonate her never really happened, and that kind of just got lost in here. The romance, very torn on, because there were occasions where I thought that the love interest was fairly hot, like I was into it. The majority of the time he was just very creepy, and this book is mainly told from Cynthia's perspective, but especially during the smut we do occasionally get a few pages from Ryder's perspective, which is interesting. It's an interesting shift of perspective, and I didn't really like that element either. The writing in here was okay, didn't love it, didn't despise it though. But one thing I did despise about this, which I believe is not the same in the ebook, is the formatting, because everything that should be like a line break is actually a paragraph break, and I found that to be incredibly disruptive and caused me to lose focus at multiple points. Like, it was a struggle to actually physically read this book. I will say that the pacing in here, it is way too fast paced, to the point where, like, with me struggling to focus, if I skipped like 4 lines, everything would be in a completely different place than it was when I zoned out, and I would be scrambling to kind of like catch up and find out what's going on. And the conclusion of the plot in this was kind of just like everything that was like a period of time was just taken out. So like the main character would be injured, she would be recovering, they tell her she'd been recovering for however long, and without any kind of real concern for the fact that she was injured and still recovering even though she'd woken up from being unconscious, she'd just get up and continue on with the plot. So yeah, I don't think it was very well crafted. I don't think it was very well done. I was mildly entertained throughout it, but not overly entertained. I thought that the love interest was creepy, but for some reason I'm still willing to continue on with this series. Like, I don't mind continuing, even though I just don't think it was very good at all. So take from that what you will. I don't even know what to take from that. But yeah, I was disappointed with this one, because if you search fairy romance, this comes up at the top of every list, and on Goodreads every book has an average rating higher than 4 stars. Sadly, not from me though. So yeah, but I'm gonna continue. I don't know why, but I really want to. So that was it. Those were the 13 books and 1 DNF from March. March was a weird month, you know. I just feel like this always happens at least 1 or 2 months of the year where my entire reading is just completely unlike me and very off-brand, and everything's like all over the place, like with how many genres we had. But yeah, April seems like we're gonna be getting back on track. Took a little detour through March and we're back to our regularly scheduled programming, I think, from this point onwards. But please let me know down in the comments whether you've read any of these books and what you've thought of them. Aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're a go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.